Well, thank you for taking the time to learn about our exciting new project, the Anne Frank Holocaust Education Center. I'm Chuck Burke. I'm the chairman of the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust.
And I'm Sally Levine, and I'm the executive director of the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust.
The Georgia Commission on the Holocaust is committed to the development of a brand new, custom designed Anne Frank Education Center that'll have interactive, state of the art exhibits installed in a brand new building to be constructed in the heart of downtown Sandy Springs. The new center will be at the current site of the Heritage Sandy Springs building located at 6110 Bluestone Road. And upon completion, it will give the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust the innovative tools necessary to meet the challenges of providing up-to-date Holocaust programming, resources, exhibitions, workshops for Georgia's teachers, students, law enforcement, military, religious, and community organizations. Before we tell you about this new center, I'd like Sally to tell you more about what the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust does on a day-to-day basis. Sally?
Hi, so the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust is a secular organization. We're nonpartisan, and we are a state agency. We're currently attached to the Georgia Board of Regents, and you can see that this organization actually began in 1986 and became a permanent state agency in 1998. We have 15 board members, and 5 were appointed by our governor, 5 by the lieutenant governor, and 5 by the Speaker of the House. So what is our mission? We strive to preserve the memory of the Holocaust and promote public understanding of the history. We want to ensure that learning how and why the Holocaust happened is an important part of Georgia citizens' education. And more importantly, we want our visitors and our constituents to reflect upon the moral questions raised by this event and think about their responsibilities as citizens and leaders in our democracy. So perhaps you didn't know this, but we do a lot of teacher training all over the state. In fact, we were just at the Georgia Council on the Social Studies in Athens, Georgia, where there were 600 Georgia social studies teachers in attendance. We have trained over 800 Georgia teachers, and they have reached almost 80,000 Georgia students. We also have speaker programs. We have Holocaust survivors and children and grandchildren of survivors who speak to schools and all kinds of organizations all around the state of Georgia. We have been promoting this program and have had audiences over thousands. We also do programs for law enforcement, and we also do programs for the military throughout Georgia. We used to have an exhibition on Anne Frank called Anne Frank in the World, and at the time we had over 7,000 visitors a year come to our facility. We had visitors from 48 of the contiguous states and 16 different countries. We are also now partnering with Georgia Public Broadcasting. There's a brand new documentary by Ken Burns called The U.S. and the Holocaust, and we are doing programming. We've already done one in Atlanta, and this month we have one coming up in Savannah. We also have an exhibition which you may have seen in Georgia's Capitol, and this particular exhibition was unveiled on January 27th, 2020, which was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. If you look at the photograph on the right, there are 5 different Holocaust survivors, and in just the past 2 years, only one of them is still with us. So we understand the urgency of capturing these stories. We also have 3 different exhibitions that are traveling through Georgia libraries throughout the state. We're working with the Georgia Library System. We also send staff members and speakers to these libraries. We've already had thousands of people come through these exhibitions. We also do programs online, and they're now available on YouTube after we do them live. Our presentation on the Holocaust in Ukraine had over 9,000 hits at this point. We are also now connected and in partnership with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They have an organization called Conference for Holocaust Education Centers, and we are participants in that. And I am also on the board of Anne Frank Center USA. We also do a program in the Capitol every year to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day. That's usually in April. We honor Holocaust survivors, liberators, and rescuers. In addition, we've conducted over 30 oral history videos of Georgia's survivors and liberators. We are also working with children and grandchildren of survivors to create programs for them to bring around the state. We have many volunteers who work with our visitors who help us with our programming. In past years, they used to contribute over 900 hours per year. And I think most important for you to understand is that everything we do, our exhibitions, our programs, the resources we share, are provided to our constituents free of charge. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck, who's going to give you a status update on the Anne Frank Holocaust Education Center.
Thank you, Sally. Let's go to the next slide, Sally. The the city of Sandy Springs has been terrific in working with us, and they are going to build a new building on the site, as I mentioned, of the current Heritage Building on Bluestone Road. So this is going to be a tear down. It's going to be a new building designed to exactly what the specifications we are. Now that is a great location. As a matter of fact, their city is working on a master plan right now, and you can anticipate that at some point over the next few years, there's going to be other elements going in around that area, probably some apartments, some retail, some restaurants, and all. So this is going to be right in the heart of what we call downtown Sandy Springs. Let's go to the next one. We're going to have 7 exhibits in there. I call them world-class exhibits, and we get done. I think you're gonna agree that these are terrific. The first one, let's go to that one, Sally, is a replacement for the old exhibit that we used to have, Anne Frank. This is going to be designed for us by the Anne Frank Center in Amsterdam for us exclusively, and we will be one of the few places in the entire world that will have this exhibit as a permanent exhibit. And we're also going to customize it. Sally, you want to mention about that?
Yes, I will in just a second. But what we're also going to do is take Anne Frank and her family's story, and we're going to place it in the larger history of what was going on in Europe and the United States at that time. And then we're also going to customize it. A very interesting story. There was a woman who lived in Atlanta. She passed away just a few years ago, named Mary Boz Schneider. And Mary was actually born and lived in Amsterdam during the same time as Anne, and she was one of Anne's friends. You can see a photograph above her head. It was a birthday party, and both Anne and Mary were at that party together. Mary also had an autograph book that had some comments from Anne. Mary's father was Jewish, her mother was not, and they were able to flee from Amsterdam to the United States. Mary survived and, of course, was brokenhearted to find out what had happened to Anne Frank. And she contacted Otto Frank, Anne's father, who was the only survivor, and eventually met with him and provided him with these photographs and with the autograph book. We had the opportunity to interview Mary, and we will be taking clips from that as well as photographs to also tell the story about how it's connected to Georgia.
So that's the first exhibit. And the second one is I think it's pretty exciting. We're going to recreate the actual rooms of the secret, the hidden annex. It was only 540 square feet. And so we're going to actually take and build those rooms in our complex. Let's take a look at what those rooms look like, Sally.
Okay, so here is a replica of what Anne's room looked like, and you can see the window in the back. That is a window that Anne used to peek out of from time to time. There was a chestnut tree right outside of her window, and she used to watch the seasons change, etc. She never got to go out. So that was really her connection with what was happening outside of her room.
And the Anne Frank house is going to work with us, Sally, right, to try to find period furniture, wallpaper to make it look as close as we can to what it actually looked like.
Right, and to give our visitors that experience of what it must have been like in that space for 8 people who lived in that very small space.
For 761 days.
Correct. And this is a replica of Anne's desk. And of course, you can see her diary featured in the center of the desk. And then this was a multi-purpose room that the 8 residents used to use. This was their kitchen. This was their dining area. And in the evening, it became a bedroom for some of the inhabitants there. So we will be able to show this to our visitors who might not have the opportunity to go to Amsterdam and see the actual house.
So as I look at it, just those first 2 exhibits are going to bring a lot of people in from all over Georgia, probably the Southeast. The third one is all about Georgia survivors and liberators. And we're doing this in conjunction with the Bremen Jewish Museum here in Atlanta. And this is not just about Jewish survivors and liberators. We're also going to talk about some African American liberators, and let's get into that a little bit and talk about what that exhibit's going to be like. Sally?
Sure. All right, so we're going to tell the story of our Georgia survivors, and we'll start by showing pictures of what their lives were like before the Holocaust. And we're hoping that our visitors will be able to connect with family vacation photos, with children on bicycles, with class pictures, etc., so that they understand that this is an event that happened to regular people, to people like them and their families. So we'll be telling their stories, and we hope to be able to tell some of those stories actually through their own voices.
Sally, go back to that last slide, the one that I always like to comment on. And now the last one
The
with
one
only
before
10.
that. Okay.
Yeah. So up in the right-hand corner, you'll see, and Sally's pointing to it now, you'll see some people in there. One of those is Henry Burnbury. Many of you in Atlanta probably knew Henry. Unfortunately, just passed away now a couple of years ago. But his son David happens to be on the Holocaust Commission, well known throughout Atlanta. But you see, this is the kind of thing we're talking about. We're talking about real people in their real lives, and this was Henry before the war. And Sally, we're going to have a great exhibition about Henry, and tell him why we're going to feature him.
Well, so Henry had an amazing story. Henry grew up in Dortmund, Germany. In 1939, his parents realized the peril that was going on, and they had an opportunity. They could not get out of Germany, but they had an opportunity to send their son, who was 14 years old, alone to the United States. Henry ultimately ended up in Atlanta. He went to school here. He graduated high school. And when World War II began, as an American citizen, Henry enlisted in the military. Henry went back to Europe and fought for the United States and was actually a liberator. So he was not only a survivor, but a liberator. Henry's parents did not survive. So we'll be telling that. That's one of the stories that we'll be telling.
So let's go through now. Let's go to the this happens to be a slide that's it's in the Holocaust Museum, and excuse me, can't control these sneezes. Happens to be in the Holocaust Museum in Washington. That's Hibby Margot. Hibby is an Atlantan. He's 98 years old. He and his brother both served. We'll be featuring people like Hibby in this exhibit, and it'll be interactive. You'll be able to hear them telling their actual story as we go through. And the next slide is of William Alexander Scott III, an African American. He was a sergeant. He served in a segregated unit, like they all were in World War II. And he was one of the people who came upon Buchenwald. And he was also a photographer. And if you know the story, when General Eisenhower came to his first concentration camp, he was so appalled by what he saw, couldn't believe anybody could do these horrible, horrific things. And he said, you better take pictures of everything, because at some point people are going to deny this could have possibly happened. Well, William Alexander Scott III was one of those people who memorialized it and took pictures of a lot of that. So we're going to be telling his story. And there is as Sally mentioned before about going around to the libraries, there's a a traveling exhibit right now about William Alexander Scott that's going around the state right now. We'll have more information about him as we go through. Let's go through the next slide.
Right, and just to add, however, this is also a way into the history for our visitors of color. And there are lots of different ways into the history, so this is just another way to connect with it.
And, you know, you get a lot of students coming in, diverse community as well as the Caucasians. And what you find is one of the most interesting things is they look at this and they learn about this, many of them for the first time, and they say, didn't anybody know about this? Didn't anybody want to do something? Like they all have their phones now, they can ask Google or Alexa or something. Well, obviously, we didn't have it then, but that information was out there. We're going to replicate as a fourth exhibit a an exhibit that is in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which is all about what did Americans know, and we'll adapt it also for what the Georgians know. And what we'll do, let's go on to the next slide. We will have the actual newspapers from Georgia, actual newspapers from around the country. We'll have other media. The information was there if people really wanted to pay attention. All right, you can see the headlines here. We're not going to get into this now, but we'll have a lot of information. But what this part of this exhibit is also the Gallup people had started doing surveys at that time. And this was a survey that was done in 1938, the same month as Kristallnacht. And they were asking Americans, this happens to be two of the questions. Do you approve or disapprove of the Nazi treatment of Jews in Germany? Well, 94% said no. Okay, that's not surprising. But then you ask a follow-up question. Should we allow a larger number of Jewish exiles from Germany to come to the United States to live? 71% said no. Now, the knee-jerk reaction to that was, well, that must be anti-Semitism. But as you move ahead, Sally, to the next slide, what was happening in America at that time, even though the Depression started in 1929, in 1938, the unemployment rate nationally was between 18 and 20%. People were just worried about putting food on the table. And so you didn't, you got to believe that some of this was the fact that people are thinking, well, I don't want to bring more people in to compete against me. I need to take care of my family. And in the next slide, in Georgia, next slide, Sally. Next slide. In Georgia, it was a very agrarian economy. And somewhere, but like it says here, 48% of Atlanta's workforce was employed. There were a lot of people who were unemployed. Anyway, that exhibit itself, we think, is going to be very educational for our visitors.
Yeah, and I think that it will reflect and address a lot of the Georgia social studies standards as well.
So if that's not enough to bring everybody in, I think the fifth one is the most phenomenal of all of them. Now, some of you may have seen this technology on 60 Minutes, but the Steven Spielberg USC Shoah Foundation has brought survivors into a highly sophisticated studio out in California, and they sat them there and asked them every conceivable question that somebody might want to ask a survivor. And through the magic of AI and virtual reality, we're going to be able to, and we'll show you a quick video, we're going to be able to stand in front of a big TV screen and actually talk to a survivor and have them answer us. Sally, can you play that video, please?
Sure.
The Holocaust is an undeniable and horrific chapter in human history in which 6 million Jews and countless millions perished in genocide and crimes against humanity during the Second World War. Dimensions in Testimony is a new format of interview by which you can ask your questions of a Holocaust survivor who has videotaped answers to many questions, so that the questions that you have will be answered directly in person, life-size, and TV.
What was life like before the war?
I had a very happy childhood. I loved to be together with my family.
We understand very well the power of conversation between Holocaust survivors and the younger generation. We've seen it in our schools, we've seen it in our universities. That conversation, that moment of dialogue where I ask my question and I get it answered, is just this magic in the room when that happens. And we want to try and find a way to preserve that as best possible. What's wonderful about conversing with these Holocaust survivors in its interactive form is that it's about you, about what you want to know. Conversation allows you to learn in a way that most suits your interests. And that's where the deepest learning takes place.
Do you feel hope for the future? I always feel hope. If I wasn't hopeful, I wouldn't be talking to you or anybody else about my experience.
I'm very happy that I was able to survive. And
here I am. I was one of the lucky.
the questions that students have is what's driving the learning experience. And so we know that this is important because we're going to enable them to be able to learn through their own curiosity. We are almost out of time to have deep conversations with Holocaust survivors. If we don't have these conversations now, they will never take place.
So that is phenomenal technology. And don't ask me how they do it. That's not my expertise, but I'm glad that there are people around who understand that. It's going to be terrific. Now, the sixth exhibit is one which gets back to something that Sally had mentioned before. If you remember, Anne Frank, both from the attic and also from her room, could look outside and see this beautiful chestnut tree. Well, that tree unfortunately got diseased. They thought it died, and then it started sending up some shoots, and they've been able to propagate those into trees, and they've awarded 11 of those trees to very prominent locations. The White House, that one on the right-hand side of your picture happens to be the Clinton Library. They have promised us the 12th tree. So we're going to set up a garden outside. Has to be designed, but it will have the actual Anne Frank chestnut tree, and we'll have a statue of Anne Frank and probably some benches and some things like that. It'd be a great place for people who have been through the other exhibits to reflect and to talk about what they've seen. And then we move on to the last exhibit. And maybe this is the most important. The others, you're learning about what happened, but we don't want people to just learn and leave. It is so important for people to think about what their rights and their responsibilities are as leaders in a democracy. And as Sally has said many times to me, I like stealing other people's lines, that this thing didn't happen just with Nazis with a capital N. All kinds of people, unfortunately, helped to make this thing happen. And whether they be people who pointed out where the Jews lived or the Gypsies, there were people who ran who maybe ran the trains, things like that. Sally, talk about a little bit about what's going to be designed here.
Okay, so memory is not enough. We have to learn from what happened. We have to identify the warning signs. Genocides don't happen in healthy democracies. So it is absolutely essential as citizens, as residents of the state of Georgia, as a Georgia state agency, that we inform our visitors about their rights and responsibilities as citizens in a democracy. We're so fortunate to live in one. So we look at the history of Germany. We see that in a very, very short period of time, Germany went from a democracy to a dictatorship. We need to see the signs, especially today. We need to learn one of the first signs of the beginnings of a genocide, of the demise of a democracy, is using language to denigrate others. So we need to be very aware of that as well. And then we also need to look at what are our responsibilities as future leaders, as citizens, to ensure the survival. How do we nurture the democracy that we have today? And we also look back at history in 1935. The Nazi government took away citizenship rights from Jewish people who were living there. What rights and protections did they lose? And that's really critical as well. What does it mean to be a citizen? And then we have this quote from Thurgood Marshall. This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on. We need to empower our visitors to understand what their rights and responsibilities are.
So those are all the wonderful exhibits that we have. I'll just tell you a little bit about the framework for how this is being pulled together. The city of Sandy Springs, as I mentioned, has been terrific. They're going to be constructing the building. It's their Public Facilities Authority. They're going to house the Anne Frank exhibit and our education center, and also Sally's office. She's got a very limited staff who works with her. There's also going to be two other entities in that building. One is Visit Sandy Springs. They're the hospitality and marketing arm for Sandy Springs. And also, we welcome them, the police of Sandy Springs have a bike patrol that patrols that whole City Springs area. They needed an office and a small storage space, so they're also going to be in our building. The location, as I mentioned, is on Bluestone Road, a few blocks from City Springs. The city is going to be designing it with our input, so it'll house all our exhibits properly. They're going to choose the general contractor and manage and oversee it. And they're going to be providing the building maintenance and the upkeep, HVAC, roofing, those kinds of things down the road if they need to be replaced because they own the building. They're going to provide 24-hour exterior security. Next slide. We have a lease now that's been signed with the city in which we're actually going to be paying the city back for our portion of the space. Our portion of the space, when we know exactly what that's going to be, we're going to be paying for that over in a 20-year lease. We'll have 2 5-year options to renew. We're going to be responsible for our own utilities and insurance of the interior, exhibits, and contents. And then we're going to provide security inside, but the city will provide the exterior security of the property. The next slide. Our ask, the city, first of all, required us before we even seriously could move ahead was to make sure we had at least $3 million committed. We do. We have pledges for over $3 million, but we also need to raise about $6.5 million. And so we're talking to as many people as we can to raise the rest of those funds. The additional funds are going to be to design, build, and procure the exhibits in the center, to do the outside memorial garden, and to create and perpetuate programs that'll support the exhibits within the building. So we're going to be starting to market to the general community in early 2023, and we hope probably by the end of the first quarter or so that we will have hit our goal of 6.5 million. Next slide. So what we're doing here is and I'm glad that you came on board. I'm glad you listened. We'd like you to get the word out to as many people as you can about educating these new generations about the Holocaust, about its relevance today. You know, with all the anti-Semitism, unfortunately, that's going on in the world today, this is probably even more relevant today than it has been before. But this center will put Sandy Springs on the map and Georgia on the map for standing up against hate, against racism, against anti-Semitism, and standing for respect, tolerance, and all those important things. So thank you for taking the time. If you would like more information about this, please email me at cmburke23@gmail.com. You can contact Sally, but we thank you again for taking the time to listen to this and for hopefully getting as enthused about this project as we are. Thank you.